Hi everyone, in this video we will be going over number patterns, in particular multiplication and division patterns. If you are looking for addition, subtraction, or alternating patterns, those are featured in another video. But let's get started with our first example over here, starting with 3, going to 6, 12, 24, and 48. This pattern here is clearly increasing, but for reasons that I will show later, they aren't necessarily addition. But let's start off with the same process as we used before in the addition and subtraction number patterns. So the first thing we have to do is figure out the difference between 3 and 6. And the way we do this is using subtraction. 6 minus 3 is equal to 3. So ordinarily we would write plus 3. The next thing we'd have to do is figure out the difference between 12 and 6. So 12 minus 6, we have 6. So here we have plus 6 because we know we are increasing. But here is the problem. At first we add 3, and the next part we add 6. This is not, while this is true, this isn't necessarily what we want. Number patterns, they always do the same thing over and over and over again. So we can't have two different things. And I'll show you that it isn't necessarily an alternating pattern by showing that from 12 to 24, or 24 minus 12, we aren't adding 3 again. 4 minus 2, 2. 2 minus 1, 1. 12. So here would be adding 12. So we know this is an increasing pattern, but we know we are not adding. So the only other option is that we are multiplying instead. So, how do we know what we're multiplying by? Well, we know that in order to get from, well, actually, let's write these down again. We know in order to get from 3 to 6, we have to add 3, correct? So from 3, we add 3, and we get 6. From 6 to 12, we know we start at 6, we add 6, and we get 12. And we know to get to 24, we start at 12, we add 12, and then we would get to 24. But there are other ways of writing this. When you add a number twice, it is the same as multiplying it by 2. So in this case over here, 3 plus 3 is the same as 3 times 2. This would equal 6. Over here we have 6 plus 6. This is the same as 6 times 2, which would also give us 12. And 12 plus 12 would also be 12 times 2, which is equal to 24. So what is the same in all of these is that we are multiplying by 2. So in this case, we are not looking for how much we're adding by, but rather how much we are multiplying by. And each time we are multiplying by 2. So from 3 to 6, we multiply by 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. And just to make sure that we are doing this correctly, we're going to do this. 24 times 2 is 48. Let's double check that. So over here, just going to write 24 times 2, and we're going to do some basic multiplication. 4 times 2 is 8, and then 2 times 2 is 4. And here we have 48, which is the exact same thing that we have right here. So now we know our number pattern. So we can write that pattern rule right here. So here we go. Here's the pattern rule. So we always write what we start at. So here we have start at what number? We have 3. Start at 3. And then each time what we do? Well, we multiply by 2. So multiply by 2 each time. And this would be our pattern rule. Now remember, you don't always have to multiply by 2 each time if the numbers were different. If you were multiplying by something else, you would have multiply by 3 or multiply by 4. But in this particular case, we are multiplying by 2. Now, we have to determine the next 3 numbers. And how do we do that? Well, we apply the pattern rule, multiply by 2 each time. So we are going to multiply 48 times 2 in order to get our next number, just as we did in the previous videos, applying the same pattern rule to get the next number. So here we go. We have 48, so let's write that here, 48, and we are multiplying by 2. Let's do this very quickly. So 8 times 2 is 16. We put a 6 down here. The 1 from the tens column goes up here. 2 times 4 is 8. 8 plus 1 is 9. So here we have 96. And to our next number, we also must multiply by 2. So let's do this again. 96 times 2. Here we have 6 times 2, which is 12. Put the 1 up there. Keep the 2 down here. 2 times 9 is 18. 18 plus 1 is 19. So we have 192. And then for our last number, we are going to do the exact same thing. We are going to do what our number rule tells us, or what our pattern rule tells us. So we must multiply 192 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 9 is 18. We put the 8 down here, carry the 1. 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 is 3. And our final answer should be 384. And there we have it, the number pattern rule for this multiplication pattern. Now, let's quickly switch over to this next example, which starts off with 256. Now, that might be a big number, but don't worry, we're going to get through it together. So we start off with 256, then we go to 128, then 64, then 32, then 16, and as far as we can tell, this is a decreasing number pattern because we are going down. But just like the previous example, I'll show you why this isn't subtraction and rather division. So we start off at 256 and we go to 128. Well, we can subtract to find the difference. So we start off with 256 and we subtract 128, which is the smaller number. 6 minus 8, we can't do that, so this turns into a 4. 16 minus 8 is 8. 4 minus 2 is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. So here we have minus 128, because we are decreasing by 128 to get 128. Now you might notice that this is essentially the same number. We'll get to that in a second. Next, we go from 128 to 64. So we start off with 128 and we subtract 64. Well, the difference is 8 minus 4 is 4. 2 minus 6, we can't do that, so we must borrow a 1, turn that into a 0, and we have 12. 12 minus 6 is 64. And so here we have minus 64. And so now we run into the problem, again, that we did earlier for the multiplication, that we are not doing the exact same thing each time. And so this wouldn't be the proper rule for a pattern rule. So instead, we have to figure out another way. So since we are not subtracting, the only other option is dividing. So this must be a division pattern. So the way we do this is we've already noticed that we are subtracting the same amount that we are left with the exact same number. And so what essentially we are doing is splitting the number in two. So we could test out a bunch of different things with a bit of long division. So I'll show you right here. Write in your larger number as the dividend and try a bunch of different divisors here. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. You'll get one of them. But for this example, it's going to actually be quite easy. I'm going to try 2 here. And we're going to try to do this long division here, and hopefully our quotient will be the next number right here. If we do that, then our answer should be correct. So how many times does 2 go into 2? 1 time. 1 times 2 is 2. Then we subtract 0, bring down the 5. 2 times 5. How many times does 2 go into 5? Well, 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. Bring down this 6. How many times does 2 go into 16? 8 times. 8 times 2 is 16. And we have, when we subtract it, 0 remainder. And we do have 128, which is the same number over here. Meaning that this divisor over here is correct. So we know that we are dividing by 2. Instead of subtracting 128 over here, we can divide by 2 instead. Now we can test out if we are still dividing by 2 by testing 128 divided by 2. So we can do that over here. (128) and put the divisor here. So how many times does 2 go into 1? Well, no time, so let's move on to the next 2 digits. So how many times does 2 go into 12? Well, 2 goes into 12 6 times. Remember to write it above the last digit that you use in the dividend. And then 2 times 6 is 12. And now we can subtract. 12 minus 12 is 0. Bring down the 8. We have 8. How many times does 2 go into 8? Well, it goes in 4 times. 4 times 2 is 8. We subtract, and we have 0 remainders. And our quotient is 64, which is the same right here. So instead of writing minus 64, we can write in what we did, which was use this divisor dividing by 2. And you can do this process again and again to confirm that we are always dividing by 2 in this pattern. And so we have a patterned rule. So let's write that out. Pattern rule. So here we start at 256, which is our first number, and then we write what we do each time. We divide by 2 each time. Now it's not always going to be 2, but for this example it is. So let's continue on this pattern to figure out the last 3 digits. These are going to be a lot easier and a lot smaller because they're smaller numbers. So let's write this over here. So 16 divided by 2. You might not need to do this long division because these are small numbers, so you should know how to do them. But 16 divided by 2 is 8 with 0 remainders. So here we have 8. And then we can continue this pattern, divide by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So we have 4 here. And then 4 divided by 2 is just 2. And so there we have it. We have our pattern rule and we have completed the pattern. If you are interested in the addition and subtraction or alternating pattern rules, please check out our other videos. Otherwise, hope you have a great day and hope to see you in the next video.